Good morning, dear friends. It is Thursday, October 14th, the 8th of Cheshvan, and we are joined here today for our daily Talmud study. We are studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We are currently studying Masechet Shabbat, tractate that discusses all about the laws of Shabbat. We are in the 8th chapter on page 81a, and we'll be turning shortly to 81b. Shabbat, as we know, has two. If we have to describe Shabbat, there are two general aspects. There's what you got to do, and there's what you oughtn't to do. There's the things we do, the things that we don't do. And our present discussion, much of this discussion of Masechet Shabbat, are discussing practices that are prohibited or permissible, and many times it's about figuring out precisely which parts of human living are permissible and not permitted. There are two important details that we're currently discussing. One is called muktzah. The laws of muktzah are items that one is restricted from handling on Shabbat. Without getting into the lengthy explanation, generally items that have no use, have no function, and are prohibited to use, as well as some other factors, those are typically not handled on Shabbat. So those that are, for example, super Shabbat observant, and they don't use their smartphone on Shabbat, not only would they not use it, they also wouldn't handle it because it is muktzah. And so that's one aspect that's going to come into play today. The other aspect is that we also do not carry items outside of an Erev on Shabbat. And so without getting into all the laws of Hotza'ah, it is prohibited when one is in a public domain to carry something from point A to point B. Our Gemara for the last several days, or perhaps even a few weeks, have been discussing items that are prohibited to transport, to carry on Shabbat. What's the general rule? As we've been discussing, if something has a legitimate common use, people want to store it, to hold on to it for that use, well, most likely that is an item that you cannot carry. And that's what we've been discussing for a while. Our most recent teaching went through a series of substances, a series of items, and told us when and what dimensions those items need to have to be useful. And if it's considered useful, it is also not to be carried on Shabbat from point A to point B. Of course, when there's an Erev, which most of us live in places that have Erevs, that carrying is permitted. Rabbi?
Rabbi, is there anything in common among the items? Because technically we could discuss sand, we could discuss wood, we could discuss anything.
Well, indeed, our Mishnah goes through
items.
Our Mishnah is going through a series of items, one at a time.
But currently, why those?
Well, at the close of this Mishnah, we can ask if anything was omitted, but for now, it's a pretty exhaustive list, right? We've been going through a lot of different substances, so I would hold off on that question until the end, and we can say, hey, why is this item missing? And we can discuss that. Now, presently, our discussion has taken us to the discussion about carrying stones, rocks. And the question is, what is a rock useful for? And so the Mishnah mentioned that a rock might be useful, not on Shabbat, to chase away animals. Now, you don't always need to chase away an animal, but if you're a farmer, for example, and they're chomping on your, I don't know what, Alan, what are they chomping on?
Corn. Grass, weeds.
If they're chomping on your new herbs, you planted a new garden, and the animal's chomping on it, you may wish to scare the animal away. Now, you may wish to use a scarecrow, but maybe that doesn't work. But you would be within your rights to chase away an animal that's chomping at your freshly planted garden. That's what the Mishnah mentions. Being that a rock of a certain size would be influential in chasing away an animal, such a rock, such sizes shouldn't be carried. If I recall correctly, Mark, we said it was a rock that was how many zuz?
It was
7 zuz.
It came out to be 2.5.
10. You're right. 10. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. That was
that was the Mishnah. That was the Mishnah. Now the Gemara brings up another issue, and this is an issue that, as we mentioned yesterday, could be a little awkward, but the Gemara doesn't shy away from awkward conversations. In ancient times, stones had another use. The use was in lieu of toilet paper for hygienic purposes after one does their bodily functions. So a person has bodily functions. That's been part of human existence, and actually not only humans, all creatures since I imagine the beginning of time. It's not something that we talk about. As a matter of fact, Mark, I think Mark is you that mentioned that on
Yes.
TV, the notion of a human being going to the restroom was not portrayed until
Probably until the late 70s, early 80s.
late
Whenever
70s, early 80s.
Archie Bunker, All in the Family was the first TV show that portrayed it. They didn't actually show it. You just hear it in the background.
So now,
You know.
So now, although in society we don't typically talk about it, as so much so that the television didn't even have a reference to the notion of using the facilities until the late 70s, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So for example, if you're a physician, you're not going to avoid a topic just because it's the least pleasant topic. You need to know, at least generally, all the aspects of human biology and human medicine, including those of the GI nature and such. Similarly, Jewish law, although maybe it's not the most comfortable and pleasant topic to discuss, Jewish law is not going to shy away from advising and providing counsel how to navigate Jewish living, even as it pertains to
Rabbi, we even have the bracha.
Correct. So, for
Way
example,
back.
Judaism. Correct. So, for example, Judaism doesn't, and this is a general, and I know we need to get back into the Gemara. I'm just trying to give this overview. Judaism in general is more open than perhaps other people or societies, so much so that there's a blessing when a human being goes to the bathroom. There is a special prayer called Asher Yatzar, which in we acknowledge the gift that Hashem has given us of a healthy, functioning body, and we're grateful for all functions, including the removal of human waste. And it's usually a sign that the human body is working well. And God forbid, perhaps all of us have had experiences where our GI tract has taken a beating in one way or another, and it's not pleasant. And so we're grateful to Hashem. When it comes to the laws of Shabbos and when it comes to the laws of Muksa, we are presently entertaining a conversation about best practices for these stones that were once the prevalent, prevailing resource to hygienically cleanse oneself after removing human waste. And that is going to be today's discussion, as was yesterday's discussion. And so yesterday we covered the fact that we're talking again, the Talmud was composed, I shouldn't say it was composed, it was transcribed 1800 years or so, 1800 years ago. And these were conversations and teachings that had been preserved from the 400 years, let's say, prior, give or take. Maybe we could be a little bit, but we're talking about all of the conversations that revolved around the Mishnah and beyond. And so in those days, they would use rocks, and there were certain dimensions that were considered primarily used for that function, and therefore they were allowed to be carried, even though on Shabbat, we don't typically go around carrying stones for no reason. Now I'm going to share the screen. We're going to begin the Gemara. Before I do that, I just want to mention that we are learning and praying for speedy healing for, bear with me, for Leah Basrita, Yosef ben Chaya, and Harav Shimon Halevi ben Leah, as well as mentioning the names of recently departed Daniel Yerachmiel ben Gedalia and Aryeh Yaakov ben Lipman. Neshama should have an aliyah. Let's share the screen. Let's get started. And I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to give a special welcome to Alex. Alex, it's good to have you on. If you would have asked me, well, I'm thrilled that you're here. And I'm glad we got a chance to chat yesterday. Stick on as long as you're comfortable. But I'm just warning you, it's going to be talk about the GI tract and that process. Here we go. So again, we're talking about what you can and cannot handle. You can handle rocks that were used in the facilities. You could not use a clod of earth, which was crumbly and therefore not appropriate for cleaning oneself. Additionally, we said a person is allowed to carry these rocks into a restroom, a handful, so long as it is a permanent restroom, and therefore if there are any rocks that have not been used, they'll be useful the day that follows. Somebody want to? What are they digging? All right. Amar Rav Sheshas. Rav Sheshas says, warning, we're going to get right into it. Im yesh aleha eid mutar. Typically, a rock is muksa, unless it's a sign for the kiddush. Unless it has a very precise and necessary function. For example, to use in cleansing oneself. If it had the right dimensions. Rav Sheshes adds, Im yesh aleha eid. If this rock has evidence that it was already used in the hygienic cleansing of oneself after doing their business, mutar, it would be permitted to carry such a rock. Again, I'm not saying you want to carry it, but for the purposes of muksa, it is not muksa because it is clearly associated with this necessary function. Rashi, kinuach hameid shasuy lakach. There's evidence that it was used for such a purpose. Mutar l'taltal likinuach. It can be used for such said cleansing. The Gemara is now going to bring another text from another source that talks about, again, trigger warning or whatever the right warning is for this topic. The Gemara has different discussions about best practices, about medical purposes as well. And the reason being that the Gemara is very passionate about, Jewish tradition is very passionate about preserving human health. Now, I apologize. This is an important call. I just need 1 minute. All right, pardon. So the Gemara in Jewish tradition is very passionate about human wellness and human health, and therefore the rabbis preserved and presented to those who would listen best practices for helping one's health, including this text, which is how to avoid hemorrhoids. Meisvei. So the Brisa is going to present such a teaching, and it's going to be in a contradiction to our previous statement. There are 10 things that are not good to do because they could bring one to experience hemorrhoids. The Elohim, these are they. If one eats the leaves of, Rabbi Steinsaltz here says bulrushes, konim. Anyone here ever ate a bulrush or a leaf of a bulrush? So bulrushes are a tall, rush-like water plant native to temperate regions in the northern hemisphere, widely used for weaving and grown to aid water purification in some areas. Apparently, some people would eat them. They're part of the reed family, and they're not good for eating, says the Gemara. Nor should one eat parts of the grapevine. Rashi, oison pitzulim hagdolim begefen v'karin vidlish. So I don't think we're talking about grape leaves. Grape leaves, I believe, are a very important part of a Jewish culinary tradition. Is that true? Anyone here ever tasted a grape leaf?
Yeah.
Certainly the Middle Eastern.
It's a big Greek delicacy.
Yeah.
Sephardic and Greek Jews do a lot of grape leaves. Yeah. But there are parts of the grapevine that also could be detrimental to one's GI health. And eating certain parts of the animal, the palate and the tongue of the animal without salt, Rashi. Okay, Rashi says that basically the animal, typically, most meat has a common appearance in a certain pattern, but there's certain parts of the animal's mouth that look different. For example, the tongue has a different texture and presentation, and as well as other parts of the mouth that have like buds of sorts. And apparently, in the medicine of the time, it was understood that it needs to be consumed with salt and failure to do so could cause one GI problems. The shidrei shel dog, similarly, eating a fish spine, no good. Dog maliach shalei bishul kol tzarkai, an insufficiently cooked salty fish. V'ashoisa shimrei yayin, and if you drink the dregs of wine, v'mekaneach besid, and if one uses the following in lieu of toilet paper, if you use lime, ubecharsis, if you use clay and a stone, and one of the other things that medically is discouraged because it could be bad for your GI tract is using an already used stone. This should be very obvious, and I'm sure it is very obvious to all of us. But again, maybe it wasn't obvious then. And so what's this all what is the question we're asking here? We read here that you're allowed to handle a stone that already has indication of use for cleansing, for hygiene, bathroom hygiene, if we can say that. And here we're saying that it's not good to use a used stone. Now, if a stone that's already been used can't be used again, well then, it should be muksa. Because the laws of muksa, the laws of things that can be handled, is if you're not allowed to use it, and if it has no use, it is muksa. It cannot be handled. So let's see how the Gemara is going to answer this question. But first, we need to continue reading the text. There is another tradition. There are those that say that a certain crouching position in the facilities could be not good for you. By the way, I think today's medicine says the opposite. Rashi, a person is not sitting down. What we see here is an already used stone is not good for use again. And we said over here that Rabbi Shesha says that if there is an aid, if there's testament that it had already been used, then it's not muksa. So the Gemara gives what is, well, the Gemara is going to give a few answers. The first answer, I'm sorry, just got to take it. The second answer might make sense. Maybe a stone has multiple sides to it. And so it's plausible that once upon a time, a person might use a stone, the clean sides of a stone. The Ibai Sema, alternatively, the Gemara says Hadidei, Hadichabre. There is a distinction between if it's from your own use or from someone else's use. If you already used it, again, we're not talking about what a person might want to do, but I guess what it wouldn't have the same health challenges if it was his own reused stone. Again, don't say I didn't warn you. So again, the question is a stone muksa on Shabbos? And the answer is generally yes, with the exception of use for cleansing oneself in a time and place where that was the preferred method. And again, it's likely that until the development of toilet paper, or as someone said, the paper that covered the apples, or until the development of paper period, well, if you didn't have leaves, you might have used a stone, and that stone would not be muksa. And one of the ways that a stone is not muksa is if there's evidence that it was used. The Gemara asks, hold on, a used stone is absolutely not good for your health. And the Gemara gives some proposals. And the second one, which sounds has more of a ring of truth, a person might plausibly want to use the clean side of a stone. Again, I'm sorry if you're feeling traumatized from this Gemara. Let's continue. We're not done yet, by the way. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, another question. What if there's a dirty stone? Someone asked this question yesterday, by the way. A stone that was dirty, and now it's been cleansed. Is it considered muksa, or is it not considered muksa? What's the question? If it has residue indicating that this is to be used in the restroom, well, then we said it's not muksa. Well, it had that evidence, and the evidence washed away. Does it lose its non-muksa status, or is it still permitted to be used? Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. If the rain fell on the stone and the indication that it was used were obscured, the question is moving the stone a problem? Is it permitted because we said that you're allowed to use such a stone, or is moving it a problem because it may have been reset, it may have lost the status of set aside for using the restroom? Rabbi Yosef says if the indication is still apparent, it is permitted. You still understand that it was used for this purpose. What's the question? Anyone here has a question that we need to answer? was the stone used before Shabbos? Is it used on Shabbos? So I think obviously we're talking about that it was used prior to Shabbos. Therefore, the question
What
was,
if the stone was used and the rain washed it away and some other person needs it or sees it on the floor and picks it up and uses
that's a
it?
good question. That was actually, I think that was really what your question was yesterday. I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. I imagine it's going to depend on how we understand this previous text that says that someone else's stone is a problem.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi.
I imagine that the cleansing of the stone is a common practice. It wouldn't make sense that every time you use the stone, you got to go find another stone.
I imagine you're correct. I imagine, again, being that thankfully this is not our reality, and may Hashem bless us that it never become our reality.
For sure.
So for that reason, some of these ideas are somewhat obscure, but you are probably correct that in a society that you had special stones, you probably also cleansed them and reused them. I don't think you put them in the dishwasher, but you probably had some method of cleaning them. And so I guess Alan's question, and Rebberal as by extension is asking, is so are these perpetually not muksa because they're designated for this purpose, or when they're being washed? And so here's what I would think: if you had a special stone that had etched in it or engraved in it, for bathroom use, I imagine that would be sufficient to make it never muksa because it's clearly designated for this function. Here, our question is: a random stone, is a random stone muksa? Usually, yes. But a random stone that's usually muksa, if it has evidence that it's specifically used for this function, it would be permissible. So now the question is, what if it's mostly washed off? And the Gemara says, well, there's still some evidence, there's still some residue. But what if it is, more significantly washed off? Now let's take a look real fast in the Shulchan Aruch.
What a way to transmit disease.
Well, look, in those days, they didn't have the medical knowledge that we have, nor did they have the prosperity and the means to manufacture toilet paper and to ship it. And I know it's Minyana the Yoma. Now they're talking about the challenge of shipping and getting stuff through.
Rabbi, it's very, very intelligent to use a stone, as stupid as it may seem to us, because the harder the surface, the less absorption. You lose anything else, you would spread disease much faster than from a rock.
Perhaps. Look, the Welt is nicht meshuga. Human beings managed.
Yeah, figure it out.
Yeah. All right. So what I want to show you now, Alex, are you there? This is what we call Talmud hazing.
We scared him. We scared him.
All right, come, Simon. So I want to show you really briefly from the Shulchan Aruch. So what we're reading currently,
Yeah, I'm here.
is hey, good to have you on. So we're currently studying is a text called the Talmud. The Talmud has the general conversations that become that and the development of Jewish law that ends up trickling down into works, more recent works called the Code of Jewish Law, which has a more organized presentation of the Jewish law. And it's what is usually informs Jewish practice. So I just want to take a fast glance, folks, in the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, composed by Rabbi Yosef Karo, where he writes and he codifies the ideas that are being expressed in the Talmud. So let's read this real fast, and we'll go back into the Gemara. Mishum kavod habriot, because of human dignity. Because, although usually you're not allowed to handle stones on Shabbos, they're muksa, Judaism is concerned and provides for human dignity. And human dignity necessitates having the ability to cleanse oneself. And therefore, stones, which were once the primary tool for such cleansing, you can carry them, and a person can even take them onto the roof. They have a tircha yisera, although it's a big hassle, mutter, it's still permissible. Because what are they doing on the roof? I guess that's where they had to, it was an obscure private place to do one's business. A person that has a set space as their restroom, and I don't think this means like us that we have an actual bathroom in our homes, but we're talking about some kind of outhouse. It's a designated space. A person is even allowed to transport to this exterior outhouse stones. How much? Meloy hayad, a handful. But because tomorrow or the next time he needs to do his business, he'll go back to that very space. So if he has any leftover stones, he's not carrying them unnecessarily. He's carrying them and he'll place them there until he needs them again.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Why is bringing it up to the roof different? I mean, it's still a shutar ayachid, isn't it? Would the roof be
Correct.
a
Here we're
shutar
not again. Here we're not talking about tiltul. I'm sorry, hoitzah. Here we're not for the moment talking about
We're
carrying
talking about muktzah.
in the public domain. We're only talking about muktzah right now. I'm sorry, I know that may be
Okay.
confusing.
Okay.
Most of our Masechta has all been about hoitzah, about carrying, but this present conversation is about muktzah.
Rabbi,
Yes,
from the
Professor.
point of view of the muktzah, isn't that what we are discussing now similar to previous discussions where we were allowed to use a tool not for its direct purpose, but for some other, since the direct use of stones is for construction, then using it for hygienic purposes or to chase away animals is a different kind of use, not the direct use to which the stones actually should be designated.
Correct. So usually, for the purposes of the laws of muktzah, a person would need to designate the stones prior to Shabbos. However, because of kavod habriot, because of this pressing and real human need, there's a waiver which allows us to, where there's somewhat of a relaxation of the laws of muktzah, allowing a person to use stones that are necessary, assuming they did not have the opportunity to take care of this before Shabbos. If you have the ability to take care of it before Shabbos, then you certainly should take care of it before Shabbos. But here we're talking about a time where maybe you didn't, there wasn't like you had a restroom to place the items because there wasn't a set space. So therefore, there's this waiver of sorts or a relaxing of sorts, whereas for other uses, there would not be this permissibility. There's this limited window of flexibility for the purposes of this function.
Rabbi, I still can't figure it out.
What can't you figure out?
You take a bunch of stones up on top of the roof,
Mm-hmm.
you clean yourself with them. and What do you do then? Throw them off the roof or put them in your pocket? I mean, it
Good
doesn't
question.
it doesn't sound like the ideal thing to do.
No, but remember, human beings didn't always have the option of doing ideal, because human beings could only live life with the resources available to them, right?
Maybe there's a pail of water on the roof, Alan.
Whatever, I'm just saying the point is, all of what we're discussing should also, there's a bonus here, which is a reminder of, as much as we might find parts of life miserable or uncomfortable, it reminds us of the great blessing and that we have in our present, in our current situation. Notwithstanding, they're saying there might be some shortages in the store. You might not be able to get your favorite toy for Hanukkah or something. But of course, this is a reminder that we're we're extremely privileged and blessed. And again, even people on this chat recall times where human beings had less conveniences or had to wait longer with greater inconvenience.
Rabbi, just think of any one of us when we have a blocked toilet, the major disaster. Even today.
And by the way, on a different note, that is the prayer of Asher Yatzar. The prayer of Asher Yatzar is saying we take this function so for granted. But God forbid if things would break down, life would be miserable. Thank you, Hashem, for making our life so smooth and easy that we don't even properly appreciate the gift of functioning life. And so, again, I'm not saying that's what the Gemara is trying to teach us, but I'm saying that this is certainly, as we ponder and wonder, how is it possible and how did it work and how could they, all of these questions are good questions and real questions, but ultimately what they do for us is they remind us of how blessed we are in our present circumstances.
Rabbi, I think sometimes what you think is a curse could be a blessing. So if the elevators are down and the plumbing goes down, all I have to do is go up to the roof very easily. So that's good.
But-
Now I
But but don't throw
Probably
those rocks.
working on the roof, Bernie. You can't even do that.
they're working on the roof, so there are rocks there, there are stones. They've been using the
The
jackal.
question is if they are the correct dimensions. You should
Bernie,
measure
the
them.
roof is gonna be crowded.
Bernie will
Ay,
pay
ay,
you
ay.
$100 for each stone you use.
By the way, I'm never looking at a stone again the same way ever again.
Not only that, the word stoned has taken on all new meaning for me for the first time.
Yeah.
Ay, ay, ay.
I'm going to start smelling the stone.
All right. So again, I just want to recap the code of Jewish law, then we'll get back in the Gemara. For the honor, for human dignity, you're allowed to carry stones for cleansing, for hygiene. You could even bring them onto the roof, which is a bigger hassle than just grabbing a stone nearby. If you have a set place for your facility, you can bring stones a handful. If he does not have a set place where he does his business, he could take a stone the size of that crusher, which was somewhere in between the two other opinions, if you recall. The imnikar by se evan shekanchu by, if the stone has evidence that its primary use, its designated use is for hygiene, mutar lachnisa afilu hu gadol harba, then you could even bring it in if it's very big. Afilu im harba mimlo yahayad, or if it's more than one handful, mutar lito kulam, the kivan shekanchu behein huchnu lakachi, stone that's ever been used becomes exclusively used for hygiene. So now this is exactly the reason why, although no one had this question, is toilet paper muksa, are tissues or whatever else a person might use for hygienic purposes, are they muksa? And the answer is of course not. Of course it's not muksa. They're designated for such a function. But as our wise professor pointed out, being that rocks have other uses, and when you think of a rock, and maybe until this Gemara shir, you don't default, your default view on a rock is not, oh, that would be great to bring into my restroom. Well, for that reason, usually it would have to be designated for use or you couldn't handle it. But because the Jewish understanding or the halacha understands that this is somewhat of an emergency, if you will, and it's urgent, and therefore a person is given a license to carry a stone, even that otherwise is truly muksa. Now let's see the Ramazah edition over here, his gloss. Some say that we're exclusively discussing if you're in a chatzir or you're in an enclosed area in your Rosh Hashanah. Alternatively, there are those of the opinion, and this is Tosfos, the afilu mi karmelis l'rashus hayachid nami shari. Perhaps you could even carry them from a karmelis to a rashus hayachid. We're not talking about biblical carrying, but we're talking about a type of carrying that it would otherwise not be permissible. Because perhaps the Chachamim gave additional flexibility. So there's a machlokes that's preserved in the Rama regarding if you might even be allowed to transport these items in a karmelis, which is typically not acceptable for carrying. And this is just now to read the section that our Gemara just now discussed in Yardu Gisham Malavanim Vinitbuhu. If the rocks that were used had water on them and they've been mostly cleaned in Mishum Nikar, if there's any evidence, Mutter Litlan Kadele Kaneach, they cannot be used for hygiene. The Ein Bazam Mishum Soiser V'Lo Mishum Teichen. Using them would not be considered for other malachas. That's an interesting comment. Hang on one second, and then we're going to move on to our Gemara.
Quick question, Rabbi.
Yes. Yes.
In our current time, Asher Yartzar is said after you leave the restroom, and there's water to wash your hands. In those days, we're assuming here that perhaps there was no water. If there had not been any water, does the person say Asher Yartzar? And can he then touch something, a holy item, let's call it, a siddur, a chumash, a talis, tefillin, without having cleansed his hands, but by just having, claimed, said Asher Yartzar, thanking Hashem for the ability to do what he did.
Interesting. First of all, I'm not going to assume that they had no water. It doesn't seem like they had no water. Maybe they didn't have enough water to use it for cleaning the rocks, or maybe you're really mean they didn't have enough water to have
it.
It
Doesn't take much water. We're talking about if it
or to have a
rains,
functioning bidet,
right?
or to have a functioning. So I don't know. It's an interesting question. I believe the halacha discusses what one should do if they don't have water, and so we would apply the halacha that we once discussed, and we could reference another time about how far one has to seek out water, and if they don't have water, then they might be able to cleanse it in another manner. So it's a good question, but I don't think our Gemara is assuming that there was no water, and I don't think the Gemara is assuming you can't wash your hands. The Gemara didn't consider water as an alternative to stones for whatever reason, though.
No, but as an alternative for cleaning. I'm talking about cleaning. If there were water there nearby.
Oh, you mean to clean the stones?
Cleaning the stone, yeah.
Well, I would imagine then for sure they remain. If you're cleaning the stones for the purpose of reusing, well, then the act of cleaning here is maintaining and keeping them designated for that use. Here, I think the understanding is that it's an average stone, which was never a hygiene stone. I don't know if that's the right euphemism here for these stones, but we'll stick to that. By cleaning it in order to reuse it, you're essentially declaring and designating them as available. Here, the question is, it was once used and it's now sitting on your roof because that's where you used it, and they've been mostly washed off. So do they lose their status as designated or not? And the answer is they could lose their status as designated, but so long as there's some evidence that that's what they're there for, well, then you can yet reuse it.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Isn't there something in the Chumash that says you can wash your hands with salt, with earth or with sand?
Not in the Chumash.
Would that be permitted?
The halacha, I don't want to say without reading the source inside, but there is a discussion of what a person does in the event that they don't have water, and there's a hierarchy of options available, and it's in the Code of Jewish Law, and it's in the Gemara that we studied in Maseches Brachos. I just don't want to say it out without reading the source because I don't want to give any. But we could look it up, God willing, in due time. And there's a hierarchy of options. The Shulchan Aruch says you have to, pursue water a certain distance, and in its absence, you might be able to cleanse your hands in some of the alternatives, Alan, that you're mentioning. But it's not in the Chumash. I think what you're referencing. Okay, I guess we're going all in today. The Chumash talks about digging a hole and covering human waste in addition to cleansing oneself, and I believe that's what you may be referring to. That a person, Jewish warriors in the Torah describes, they would carry in addition to their other tools in their Swiss Army knife. They also had to have a little shovel piece, and they would use that to dig a hole and to cover human waste.
Mhm.
All right, let's now continue the Gemara a little further, and we might end just a few minutes early today. But let's see how much we can bear this. Rabba bar Shela asked Rabba Chisda a question, and this is a question, and we already saw the summation in the Code of Jewish Law. What was the question? Are you permitted to take these stones up to the roof? Rashi, what's the question? If a person is going to use the roof for the restroom, are we concerned that now things are getting overblown? Not only is he using a rock, but the act of schlepping it up is a serious hassle, and maybe such an additional tircha is discouraged on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Rav Chisda answers, Gadol kavod habriot. In truth, human dignity is so important. Shabbat Torah, even can occasionally dislodge a negative commandment in the Torah. What does that mean? Rashi says, says that if you see your friend struggling if you see your friend's donkey struggling, you have to help them out. But the way the verse is structured here, again, we're going out to Devarim for a moment. It says, if you see your friend's ox or sheep, nidachim, they've been lost, they've gone away, v'his alamta mehem. The way we translate this is, and you think to ignore it, Don't ignore it. You should return it to your friend. Don't ignore it. But the structure of the phrasing here is a little bit interesting because although we are inclined to translate it as don't hide, ignore your impulse to look away. But the reading is, and you'll hide yourself from them. You'll pretend you don't notice. So why does the Torah have this ambiguous phrasing? It could have just said, Altis Aleim, Hashev Tashi. We can use the same number of letters and say, don't hide. Don't avoid making eye contact. So why does the Torah reference it in a way that you might avoid eye contact? And so Rashi reminds us of the Gemara that says that there are certain individuals that actually can avoid getting involved. What if it's one of the elders of town, a big Torah scholar or a big important person, and even when they have their own donkey, they don't sort it out. They'll have someone else do it for them. Well, such an individual may be permitted to also avoid getting involved over here. Similarly here, you're not meant to carry an item that's muksa. It's rabbinically prohibited. So if the Torah will even give a waiver and say that certain people can avoid getting involved, in a case where the Torah says don't avoid getting involved, well then certainly here the Chachamim are going to be willing to provide a waiver for their rabbinic enactment of muksa to allow one to have stones. That's an interesting statement and an important statement. Yasiv Maremar v'ka'amar laha shmatza. Maremar was sitting and reviewed and referenced this teaching. Ravina overheard Maremar's review. So Maremar said the story of that you're allowed, because of Kavod Abrios, you're allowed to carry stones, and certainly it's permissible because for Kavod Abrios will even allow an elderly person to avoid getting involved. And Ravina challenged Maremar. How does he challenge Maremar's statement? I should point out, dear friends, that we've turned the page and we're now on 81b. Here is the question. The Brisa teaches, Elazar says, Noitel Adam, Kesam, Mishlafanav, Lachatzos Boy, Shinav. Here is the Brisa. A person can take a piece of wood to clean their teeth on Yontif. The Chachamim disagree and say you can't just take any splinter of stone of wood to clean your teeth. You can only do it from a trowel that was presented, which is before the animals. Why? Because this tray for the animals is not muksa. It's needed to be out there on Yontif. But you're not allowed to carry a piece of wood that was out of sight and out of mind, because that's considered a muksa. Hachi hashta. Hasam adam kivei makam l'suda. Let's read Rashi. Hold on, let's read Rashi for a second. Mishalafonav. Kisamim hamotolim agabe karka. If there's a splinter of wood on the floor, you're allowed to pick it up. We don't say they are muksa. Lachatzois lita labasar shavin shalayim lach behem. Min ha'evos shu muchan alma hamidu divreihem b'makam kvad habrius shepamim shenir minchutz v'gnai hulai. So here, even though a person has a piece of sling stuck in their teeth, that's pretty embarrassing. That's the opposite of human dignity, and yet the rabbis restrict your ability to clean your teeth. There is such a thing as muksa. Rabbi Elazar says there's no such thing as muksa, but the Chachamim say yes, there is. You can only take wood if it's already been in sight and intended to be used and handled on Yontif. So the Gemara says that's not on Shabbos, on Yontif. So the Gemara says this is not a good question. Hachi hashta. Let's compare our two scenarios. Hasam Adam keveya machem l'suda. By a meal, a person has a set space for their meal. You prepare your food, or you buy the ingredients before Yontif. So you should also know to prepare a toothpick. And therefore, the Chachamim are going to be a little less flexible. Rashi, they should have prepared all the items needed for the meal yesterday. However, in those days, a person did not have a designated space for the restroom. And so they didn't have the ability to set everything up before Shabbos, before Yom Tov, or before Shabbos. And therefore, when it comes to matters of the restroom, the Chachamim are inclined to be more lenient because you had no other option. And because of Kavod Abrius, a person is allowed to make use of the stones, and one even could bring it up to the roof. Rashi. Adam This is a question. So interesting. Rashi points out, Rashi reminds us that when we read this text, we cannot project our present day scenario. And Rashi we're talking about 1,000 years ago in France, where even then apparently they did have designated places for restrooms. However, in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Gemara, Rashi describes they were living in very narrow, tight homes, and sometimes they would only live, let's say, on a second floor because of a shortage of homes or the tightness of homes. And so, therefore, a person did not have a designated place for the restroom. They did their best. And so, therefore, you cannot compare a meal time, which people were utterly prepared for, versus the restroom. Again, today, this sounds, without having the context that Rashi provides and reminding us that life changed a bit over 2,000 years, we'd have a hard time reading this text, because of course today our bathrooms are more predictable and more determined even than mealtime, right? Meals, whatever, you might eat in the kitchen, you might eat in the dining room, you might take your food to watch in front of the television. So there was a lot of options where you might have your meal, and your bathroom was more designated. But Rashi reminds us, and it's good for us to remind ourselves, that if we want to explore a text from a long time ago, you have to consider this situation. So you ask a question: if the situation changed so much, why do we even study this text at all? And the answer is that although maybe specifics of human living have changed, the principles, the essential direction that the Torah provides and the Talmud provide can be translated and is applicable with the right scholarship, and we can find the building blocks for how to live a meaningful and Jewish life even today. But we need to do a lot of translating to consider how these ideas might be applied. And that's why, in addition to studying the Talmud, you then have to study the Code of Jewish Law and then contemporary discussion. And by the way, I have a feeling this is not only when it comes to studying the Talmud, but if you want to read something written in English by Mr. Shakespeare, you also need a little bit of effort to translate and to appreciate, the meaning, what words meant in those days, and how certain situations may have varied somewhat.
Rabbi,
yes.
I imagine that there are shilas today, because I look at some of these toilets today that play music and have all kinds of functions. Would be a shaila what you could do on Shabbos or not, because it's far from just flushing.
Reb Beryl, indeed. So, for example, let's make it more simple. You walk into a bathroom, and the lights are on an automatic sensor, and then you go to the toilet, and you walk away, and it automatically flushes. And what else? You want to put your hand by the sink, and there's a sensor that you trigger the water. And so today, the gift of automation truly presents a number of questions and challenges. I'm not going to try to give you all the answers here al regel achat, but I want to agree with you that certainly technology, although for a long time it may have made things more simple, certainly the development of technology makes life a little more complicated.
Rabbi, I had this feeling that they would turn to what we're studying now exactly, hoping that we're under some kind of minimum rather than an all or nothing situation.
I'm sorry. Please repeat. I guess I missed what you just said. Please repeat that.
We have all the prohibitions that we studied, and
Beryl, you muted yourself. Hold on.
Sorry, the phone rang.
No worries.
On all the things that we had, they could have said, "Don't carry," period, and forget about it. So we have discussions about minimums. And maybe that opening of that crack would help them today to answer the kind of questions that we have. Automatic, you didn't do it.
Yeah. So Reb Beryl, Reb Beryl, if we were to take a tour, if we were to start a shir, and actually I did it on Shavuos. on Shavuos this year, we went through a series of responsa, rabbinic questions and answers based on with contemporary situations, and you're 100% correct that if we'll read the work of, let's say, I'm just pulling a name out of the hat, let's say Rabbi Avadia Yosef, right? He was a great prolific Torah scholar and has many works. He has the work Yabia Omer, full of halachic questions that people ask based on contemporary issues. And so certainly this idea of kavod abriot is a principle that will come into such a question. It's not the only principle. It has to be balanced out with other important considerations, but you're 100% correct that it's something that needs to come into the equation. Now, I think we're going to stop here in the Gemara today, but I just want to bring to your attention that Tosfos has a very resounding disagreement with Rashi. Our Gemara here asked the question, are you allowed to carry the stones up onto the roof? Rashi says, what would be different if the stone is muksa, you can never handle it. But if it's not muksa, what do I care if you schlep it across the hall or outside if you're in your courtyard or up on the roof? And Rashi says, to carry a bunch of stones up to the roof, this is a tircha yatirta, this is an extra hassle, and maybe the Gemara thought that you shouldn't do it. And so the Gemara answers that you can do it. Tosfos emphatically vigorously disagrees with Rashi. And he says, what are you talking about? And he says as follows. It's obvious that if it's not muksa, you can carry it. So he says, you know what's unique about a roof? If you always do your business on the roof, then you have a predictable bathroom. And so you can't say that there's a difference between where a person's seuda goes and where a person's bathroom is. And if it is predictable, you should have anticipated the need to have rocks before Shabbos. And that's how Tosfos understands this question. I'll just highlight it. If you have a designated space on the roof, well, then you could have prepared before Shabbos. And therefore, the Gemara's answer is, even though you should have prepared before Shabbos, it is still permissible. And the Gemara says, hold on. You're telling me that even if you have a set space, you can still carry stones and you don't have to prepare before Shabbos? Well, what about a toothpick? Over there, you could have prepared before Shabbos and you didn't. And the Gemara answers, ultimately, there's still a difference between the fixedness of and the predictability of your mealtime versus your restroom functions and needs. And therefore, there's still a willingness to provide a waiver for the human dignity associated with human hygiene after doing one's business, as opposed to mealtime. I'm just gonna give me one more second. All right. I'm sorry, doctor, you're going to say something? Dr. Hammer?
Yeah, toothpick. Yes, about toothpicks. Isn't it possible that the size of a toothpick, or you could, let's say a wooden toothpick, you could crack it in half, and it's still quite functional to take out something that's stuck between your teeth? So what would be so terrible if in every suit in the pocket you had a half a toothpick, which is that small and that had a purpose to it?
I don't want to. So you're saying let a person have a prepared toothpick, and if you run out, you just break it in half. Well, I guess this would.
If the size of the toothpick is halachically problematic in terms of what we're talking about size, let's assume that.
I hear what you're saying. You're saying now you're going to the subject of tiltal, and you're saying, could we shrink down a toothpick? So this is an instance. Let's say Reb Beryl said, why don't we include every topic? And I said, let's wait till the end. But essentially, you're agreeing with Reb Beryl a little bit. You're asking, why doesn't the Mishnah say what the smallest dimension of a splinter of wood is? And if there is a smallest dimension, is it the ability to use both ends for a toothpick? So let's keep that in mind. I do have to I know it's only 3 minutes, but I do have to go this 3 minutes early. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for being here through this very important topic of Gemara. And it's important for the laws of Muktzah, and it's important for the laws of understanding of Shabbos, and thank you for helping me get through this. And with Hashem's help, look forward to studying tomorrow once again. Alex, thank you for coming on. What a day to join us. Thank you for being here. Have a great day. In 3 minutes, you're all welcome to rejoin this very link and study today's portion of Chumash. Thank you all.